This is the untold history the world needs to hear. History is written by the victors, but what's often left out of textbooks are the uncomfortable, brutal, and hidden truths behind some of the most celebrated moments in history, the American Revolution. We often hear the American Revolution framed as a heroic struggle for freedom, but behind the patriotic myths lies a more complex truth. The revolution was also driven by economic interests, especially the desire of colonial elites to evade British taxes and maintain their own wealth and power. Enslaved Africans were promised freedom by both British and American forces, but most were re-enslaved or betrayed after the war. Many were tortured, shackled, and whipped before being sold back into slavery. Native Americans, too, were largely left out of the fight, and many sided with the British because they feared American expansion. After the war, their lands were systematically seized. Entire tribes were massacred, burned out of their homes, and forced westward through brutal marches. The revolution paved the way for independence, but only for white male property owners. For others, especially women, slaves, and indigenous peoples, it marked another chapter of exclusion and exploitation. The French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity, but also terror, mass executions, and political purges. The French Revolution is often celebrated for toppling the monarchy and igniting democratic ideals, but it spiraled into chaos and violence. During the Reign of Terror, nearly 17,000 people were guillotined. Some, like Queen Marie Antoinette, were paraded through the streets, mocked and executed to the cheers of the mob. Others, like journalist Jean-Baptiste Carrier, conducted mass drownings of prisoners in Nantes, tying hundreds together and sinking them in barges called Republican marriages. Women who demanded equal rights, like Olympe de Gouges, were arrested and publicly executed. Her last words were a defiant call for equality before the blade fell. The revolution ended not in a flourishing democracy, but in Napoleon's military dictatorship. The discovery of the Americas. We're taught that Columbus discovered America in 1492, but the land was already inhabited by millions of indigenous peoples with thriving cultures. Columbus's arrival marked the beginning of genocide, forced labor, disease, and mass displacement. On Hispaniola, natives who failed to bring enough gold were punished by having their hands cut off and left to bleed to death. Others were burned alive or hunted for sport by Spanish settlers. The encomienda system enslaved native populations in brutal conditions, with many working until death in gold mines or plantations. European diseases, smallpox, measles, and influenza, decimated up to 90% of indigenous populations in some regions. The so-called Age of Discovery was, for native peoples, an age of destruction. The Industrial Revolution. Often seen as a leap forward for human progress, the Industrial Revolution was also a time of human suffering. Children as young as 5 worked 12 to 16-hour days in dark, dangerous factories. Many lost fingers or limbs in unguarded machines. In coal mines, kids were chained to carts like mules, crawling through pitch-black tunnels. Workers who protested were often met with brute force. In the Peterloo Massacre of 1819, British cavalry charged a crowd of peaceful protesters, killing 15 and injuring hundreds. Meanwhile, factory owners enjoyed untold profits, living lavishly while their workers coughed up soot in overcrowded tenements. Pollution poisoned entire cities. In Manchester, England, the smog was so thick it was called the Devil's Breath. World War II. World War II is remembered as the Good War, the fight against fascism. But behind the heroism lie difficult truths. The Allies bombed entire cities, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. In Tokyo, more than 100,000 people were burned alive in a single night as napalm rained from the sky. In the US, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were interned without trial. Many lost everything. Soviet troops, while liberating Europe, raped an estimated 2 million women in Germany alone. In the Katyn massacre, over 20,000 Polish officers were executed by the Soviets and dumped into mass graves. Even as Allied troops liberated Nazi death camps, they found horror too late. Rooms filled with corpses, human experiments, gas chambers. The world had turned a blind eye for far too long. The space race. A technological triumph or Cold War propaganda? The US-Soviet space race was fueled by military competition, not pure scientific exploration. Both sides recruited Nazi scientists. Wernher von Braun, who became the father of the US space program, had overseen rocket factories where thousands of slave laborers died from starvation, beatings, and executions. In Nazi concentration camps like Mittelbau-Dora, prisoners were worked to death to build the V-2 rocket. Bodies were buried in shallow graves within the factory. Von Braun knew and continued anyway. Back on Earth, billions were spent on rockets, while millions lived in poverty. Scientific glory masked a brutal, often inhuman cost. History is not black and white. It's a tapestry of ideals and violence, progress and oppression. By confronting the darker sides of our shared past, we gain a clearer understanding of who we are and how not to repeat the same mistakes. If you value truth over myth, subscribe for more eye-opening history documentaries.